and welcome to our Wellness Matters webinar on self-esteem this evening. My name is Nicole Imgrund, and I'm the owner and director of River's Edge Counseling Center. This webinar is part of a series of webinars. We have recorded well over 40 of them since the beginning of the pandemic, so we have a nice group of resources of webinars on the internet for you to view if you'd like. We have some on couples and families, some on parenting, anxiety, depression, burnout. If you can think of a topic, we probably have done a webinar on it. And this webinar is going to join the others on our blog page. But you are with us live for the webinar this evening, and we could not be happier to have you here. Our presenter this evening is Sheila Ennen. Sheila is a registered provisional psychologist who works with children, adolescents, adults, and couples on a variety of issues. Sheila's approach to therapy draws on psychodynamic psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as narrative therapy. Sheila also works from a trauma-informed lens and is trained in EMDR for working specifically with processing trauma. Sheila strives to foster therapeutic relationships filled with kindness, patience, empathy, and compassion. And as someone who has known Sheila for many years in many different capacities, I can say that this comes from a very, very authentic part of who she is. And out of this experience of relationship, Sheila develops treatment plans tailored to each of her clients' unique challenges and strengths to help them find the insight, clarity, and empowerment they need to heal from the problems that they are facing. We are very fortunate to have you on our team, Sheila, and we are fortunate to have you with us this evening for this topic, which I know is one near and dear to your heart. Before I turn it over to you, I just wanted to let our participants know that Sheila's presentation probably won't take up the full hour, so we'll have a little bit of time to hear some of your comments and your questions. I'll be keeping my eye on the chat as we go in case anyone has any technical difficulties. If you want to start posting some comments and questions, you're welcome to. And also you can use the Q&A feature as well. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll have a bit of time to share those with each of you and with Sheila. But until then, sit back and relax, and I am going to turn it over to you, Sheila.
Thank you, Nicole. And thank you everyone for being here on a Thursday night. I appreciate that. And as Nicole said, my name is Sheila Ennen, registered provisional psychologist. I've been with River's Edge for a while, but in different capacities. And so this is my first time doing a webinar, and I'm excited to be here and hopefully provide some useful things. I'll share my screen and see if I can do this as well. Bear with me here. And hopefully everyone is seeing my screen. And so, like Nicole said, my topic today is on self-esteem. The top title I chose is Seeds to Growing Self-Esteem. I chose this topic because it is, near and dear to my heart. I feel like it's been a journey I've been on for most of my life, and I very much was passionate about it when I was in my master's program and degree, and I decided to do my research and like capstone thesis on self-esteem development. So I think this webinar and this information you're going to gain today will come from kind of like my academic and research in that way, but also some from my professional as well. So I hope that you gain something out of this, whether it is like a tool to use and practice daily, or if it's just some information that you learned, something you just didn't know before. So yeah, and hopefully I'll be willing to answer any questions you have at the end. So prep those too if you need. Okay, so Seeds to Growing Self-Esteem. I wanted to start off with a quote because I like quotes. So this thought it was like useful to start off with one. And I think it kind of sets the frame for kind of the topic today and kind of the information I'll share. And this quote comes from the teachings of the Buddha, which comes from the Buddhism religion. And I believe it's loosely translated, but it is a quote that I find very useful. And it says, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." And I think the reason why I find that so valuable, because it speaks to basically the inherent worth of all of us, because at the basis of it, we're all human beings, right? And so as much as we pour into others, we are deserving of that same thing being reciprocated to us. So as an overview of some of the things we'll talk about today, I'm going to just do a bit of an introduction into self-esteem, and then talk about why self-esteem is so important and what the research says about why it's so important. I'll talk about how theorists and different philosophies have like conceptualized self-esteem. I'll talk about how we define self-esteem, how self-esteem develops over the course of a person's life, the things and the aspects of our life that is correlated to the development of our self-esteem. And then I'll end with some tidbits and gems about ways for you to enhance your self-esteem and also hopefully the self-esteem of your loved ones and people around you. So a bit of an introduction. I don't know if some people have maybe or maybe not seen this similar diagram before or heard of Maslow. So Abraham Maslow is an American psychologist, and he's a pretty well-known one, pretty famous one, but especially he's, I think, well-known for his work on this diagram here, which is the hierarchy of needs. And so he developed this theory really in 1943, where he talked about the idea that like there is basic needs that a person needs in order to move on to a next stage of their life, and in succession to what is self-actualization, which is talked about at the top there, where a person can reach the most dynamic and transformative part of their life. So self-actualization is a person reaching their full potential. And he's like, and through his research and through his study of human behavior, he started to realize that there's some basic things that have to come in succession to each other in order for a person to reach that. And so I think like his theory speaks very much so to a lot of things I'll be talking about today, but it does, like, I think it's a good one if no one's ever heard of it, if you have, to kind of just review over time again, and especially because he talks about esteem right in his levels of needs. So he starts off with like a basic level of needs for all human beings as being physiological. So, and that includes like the things like food, our sleep, our health, our exercise, like anything that speaks to our physical health and well-being. Then after that, he says that once a person is able to, or when people are able to have those basic needs, once their physical and physiological needs are met, then they can try to achieve or try to strive for the next stage, which is safety. And safety can look like security, can look like having housing and a home, can look like having money and finances in order to maintain, but also enhance the physiological things that a person has. And then once a person has all those things, like they have their basic needs of like the physiological, physical things that keep them alive and healthy, and the safety to enhance and maintain those things, then they can start trying to strive for some things that are more abstract and also more complicated and sometimes difficult, which is for the next one being love and belonging, connection, really. He speaks to the fact that hopefully once we have our physical needs met and we have safety and security, that we can open ourselves up to love and connection with each other. And with that, once we're able to have that and feel the benefits of that, then we can move into esteem. And esteem, which again is just basically self-esteem, just talks about the idea that at that time, then people can look for or strive for things like achievements, prestige, I think status, respect, like self-respect and like respect for others. All of those things can be strived for if a person is able to get to that portion of their life, and hopefully in a decent sense after they've moved up those steps. And if a person is able to achieve all of those, their physical needs, their safety and security, their love and belonging and connection with people, and their achievements and prestige and status and respect, self-respect and respect from others, they will be able to achieve their full potential, which is what he describes as self-actualization. And so I think when I speak today as we go forward about the things that make up self-esteem or the things that cause self-esteem to develop, you'll notice that a lot of them connect to some of the hierarchies of that Maslow has identified, which shows that he was onto something. He knew what he was talking about in 1943 when he came up with this idea. So why is self-esteem important? I think we want to start there. One thing like that is pretty well known is that self-esteem is actually one of the things it's more of an importance and objective for more Western cultures more than it is for Eastern cultures. And I think it speaks the reason why, and it speaks to the fact of like Western cultures are more based in individualistic values. And so it is something that a lot of people in our culture, if not all, strive for at any point in our lives. And our research, and even although research around self-esteem is heavily based in Western culture, and we've found why and how it functions in our lives for it to be so important to us. One thing that we know, or like as research has found, is that self-esteem is a basic domain of our human functioning, in that it is actually important to the way that we socially interact with each other. It's important to our mental health. It's important to our overall well-being. Self-esteem also has like a self-regulatory function in that because it helps us, and I think that same as idea of it helps us kind of be self-reflective or feel in some way connected to our world in order to make understanding. So it helps, like it says in here, helps us interact with and perceive others and the world around us. It has implications for different aspects of our lives, such as our relationships, education, our work, our health, those things. And self-esteem can actually, how do we know that it can actually develop, is that we've seen countlessly and over time that it can actually change in response to a lot of important life transitions and major events. So those things can look like trauma, loss, like achievements, moving status, moving roles, like gaining things, learning new experiences. All of those things can impact our self-esteem over the course of our life. And so we know that there are things that we can actually do to help us increase our self-esteem over time. Going forward too, research has shown that self-esteem can predict like our future outcomes of like, it can actually tell us, and we can, like they've done so many studies to show that we can see if, depending on what point a person is in their self-esteem, we can see what their physical and mental health will be over the course of their life, how their satisfaction with their close relationships will be, their social supports, whether they'll be involved in criminal behavior, and whether or not like they will, well, be successful even financially in adulthood. And improving self-esteem is important because we can hopefully avoid all those things and increase our positive, like the chances of having a positive life outcomes. And again, reduce negative outcomes, because research has shown, again, that self-esteem, low self-esteem, like is very much correlated with unemployment, earning less than peers, sexual dysfunction, substance abuse, eating disorders, suicide and suicidal ideation, and dysfunctional behaviors in relationships. So all of those, which I definitely find as very crucial aspects of a person's life as we maneuver through, are things that can be impacted by our self-esteem. So self-esteem, I believe, is quite important. So how do we begin to even understand or like conceptualize self-esteem? That has been something that has been a very long journey for, I think, researchers, psychologists, theorists, philosophers over time. And one of like the earliest known people to even look into self-esteem was the American philosopher William James. And in 1890, he started proposing what self-esteem is. And he proposed it as like self-esteem as both something that is a state and a trait. So as a state, he defines self-esteem as something that can change as a function of someone's individual successes or failures. So basically, if you do well, you'll be happier, or you'll have like a confident sense of self. If you don't, you'll have lower self-esteem. He's saying that it can be a state in that way, which again was reiterated before. Or he talks about the fact that it can also be a trait, that there's inherently an average level of self-esteem that a person has that's not necessarily based on anything, that there's something within us, whether it's because of genetics, because of personality, whatever it may be, that has that average level exists. So it becomes a complex thing to start to conceptualize, because we have an average sense of it possibly, and we can also, it is also very much impacted and grown or reduced by successes and failures. So that, like, he started that idea and started talking about what self-esteem possibly could be. And then over time, others and people started trying to really reflect and start to think about how can we define self-esteem itself. And that actually has been one of the biggest controversies in social psychology over the years. And I think there's still not even a consensus, because depending on where you look, whether you look at TV, books, media, any place, like self-help books, almost every single person and every single resource will have their own definition of self-esteem. And self-esteem, like, some people will have a basis, and the definition will be based on something like self-worth or value. Sometimes it's based on self-attitude, sometimes it's based on self-evaluation, or an evaluation of a self based on comparing to others. Some base it on the way a person feels about themselves. Some base a definition of just a person's competence or meaningfulness, the way they mean to others or to themselves. And then also self-acceptance, how much this person accepts themselves. So there's so many different ways and bases for how a person can define self-esteem. So that makes it complicated. But I think for the most useful one, and just speaks to the idea as a psychologist and as a mental health therapist, that I think a good definition that I can adhere to comes from the American Psychological Association. And in the American Psychological Association's dictionary, I should say, in that APA dictionary, they define self-esteem as the degree to which the qualities and characteristics contained in one's self-concept are perceived to be positive. It reflects a person's physical image, view of his or her accomplishments and capabilities, and values and perceived success in living up to them, as well as in ways in which others view and respond to that person. So the more positive the cumulative perception of these qualities and characteristics, the higher one's self-esteem. And I think the reason I like that definition is it pretty much encapsulates everything that I've said before about all the ways that a person can define self-esteem, but in a nicely summarized way or condensed way. So yeah, that is one way to define self-esteem. So now, like, talking about how do we develop this thing that is self-esteem? Like, we know that, like I said, research has shown that self-esteem can show systematic development over the lifespan because of like major life events and transitions that we go through. Like I said, things like trauma, loss, achievements, movement into roles and stages of our lives. And research has even shown that actually the biggest change in our self-esteem trajectory happens in adulthood. That is when we see the biggest and the fastest change and dynamic change in our esteem. And that is, and it makes sense because, like I'm saying, there's so many different things that happens in adulthood that doesn't happen in childhood or adolescence. So change in roles, like people become independent, they become students, they become, post-secondary students, they become employees, employers, entrepreneurs, they become boyfriends, girlfriends, partners, husbands, wives, they become parents, they become grandparents. There's so many roles that a person goes into in adulthood that they don't get to achieve in the younger stages of life. And also relationships, we get to experience more deeper and more true and hopefully healthier relationships also in adulthood as well. Also, our physical functioning changes a lot in our adulthood, whether it is a person is like growing pains, whether it's for as a woman like childbirth, whether it is like health issues, slow metabolism, aging, all of those things change in adulthood that can impact the way that we see ourselves and perceive ourselves. And then also our social economic status. Only when we really come into adulthood is when we start noticing money and being reliant on ourselves to kind of take care of ourselves and the importance of money in doing that. And so we're always striving to achieve money. So whether it is trying to achieve better finances or having loss in our finances due to like unemployment or like stress, like money being allocated to different stressors in our lives, that can all impact the way that we see ourselves. So how does it normally look in adulthood? I guess would be where I go to next, is that the research has shown that for every single person in adulthood, our self-esteem looks like this, in almost like a parabola trajectory, and we can assume, and in some way, like as we're moving through like birth, like so somewhere here, we're gaining a certain level of self-esteem. There will be fluctuations because of different things, different adverse experiences, abuse, trauma, like body changes, all these things will affect our self-esteem as we move through adolescence and childhood. However, in general, it will increase because we're getting to find a certain sense of self in some portion. But then from 16, which most countries and most cultures kind of define 16 as the main stage of starting adulthood, to about like mid-age, which is like 51, we see the most dynamic change in adulthood. Most people increase their self-esteem quite substantially during that time. And then lots of like around age 51 and around that stage is when like our self-esteem kind of reaches its peak, and it stagnates for a little bit over the few years there, and it slowly declines as a person approaches death. And that makes sense, especially because in the idea, like if we think about just the way that it mimics the life, like a person, the human existence in general, like we're born, we grow, we like function to a certain extent, and then we start to decline. Self-esteem kind of mimics that as well. And so it really shows like it's some very important in it, like our first stages of adulthood, but over time too, the factors that that cause a decrease in older ages of life is related to a lot of things I'll just talk about in a second, but just things related to life circumstances and outcomes that decline as well, which causes our self-esteem to decline. So correlates of self-esteem. So research like has shown that there's like quite some substantial things that actually correlates to self-esteem and impacts whether a person like how their self-esteem will be affected over the course of their lives, but especially in adulthood. And so those things include relationships, interpersonal conflict, education, cognitive stimulation, our physical health, our personality, and some other random factors as well. So I thought I'd just give some tidbits in here just to know about what the research has shown across like mostly in Western and North America, but also in other cultures too, of how these factors in our lives are affected and can affect our self-esteem. So yeah, so for example, relationships. The research has shown that generally being in a relationship is actually correlated to high self-esteem. But it's that idea, like being in a relationship is more relevant and more important for early adulthood. It seems to show that people in later adulthood don't really, it doesn't, whether they're in a relationship or not, doesn't really affect whether they're going to have a high self-esteem or not. And I think that is also because in early adulthood, we're trying to find ourselves and trying to reconnect after disconnecting with our family of origin by growing up in some way. And so it is very important at that stage to be in relationship, and as a sense of impact on our self-esteem. Research has also shown that living with your partner can also be a good predictor if you have high self-esteem or not. I think that also speaks to the connection and the deeper connection you have by spending time with someone and being like more quality time with someone and being able to see them in all aspects and find acceptance and love for all aspects of the person and feeling loved by that can be really validating. And like the actual, of course, like the health of the relationship is really important to whether a person will have high self-esteem or not. So if a person is in more, like the relationship involves more positive and adaptive interactions with each other daily, and if a couple makes a lot of joint decisions together, so that it's not, so a person feels that their voice matters and that they're being considered in each decision they make as a couple in their lives, right? That can be really impactful for a person's self-esteem. Also, like something such as in older adulthood, especially having less relationship risks and anxiety that is associated can really be can impact and increase a person's self-esteem. So if a person is not involved in a lot of like dysfunction or difficulties in the relationship, or like there's no factors of the relationship that makes them overly worried about whether they're going to make it as a couple, or those kind of things, that kind of affirming and being confident in that relationship, especially in older adulthood, can be really defining for a person and increasing their self-esteem. The next thing is like attachment. And I think attachment, I would say, is actually probably the most important out of all the ones I'm listing and will list, because attachment, and I'm not sure if anyone here knows about attachment, is something that starts very early on in life. So attachment, or attachment theory, just speaks to the idea that the relationships that we each have with our early childhood caregivers, so pretty much our parents, impacts how we view ourselves in our world. And the more securely attached a person is, and like the more healthy the relationship is with a parent and a child, that will steer and determine how a person, well, it's determine so many things, actually, the research shows, but especially will to determine if a person has a good level of self-esteem in your own life. And so, in attachment theory, a person, according to attachment theory, a person can be securely attached, meaning that they feel confident and safe and secure, and they feel unconditional positive regard and acceptance from their early childhood caregivers, parents, or they can be insecurely attached. And insecurely attached can look like a person that's anxiously attached, avoidantly attached, ambivalently attached, or one or more of those combinations. And so attachment is actually something very useful. And as a self-reflection piece, which I'll talk about later, that would encourage all people to go through, to kind of always understand where your attachment comes from, because it will impact your behaviors and how you move into relationships as well, if not even the way you see yourself. And also, like, if for anyone here who's also wanting to gain some things on how to help others, and also hopefully their loved ones that are younger and children, attachment speaks heavily to that, and that the way in fostering that secure relationship and secure base in that relationship, filled with unconditional positive regard, kindness, respect, and safety for a child, can absolutely determine whether or not they will have high self-esteem. And the research shows that secure attachment is more secure attachment is a more determinant of a person whether they're going to have high self-esteem in the earliest stages of life, which is probably from like 0 to 6. So 0 to 6 in that stage of life is a very important stage for a person to be securely attached to their parents and their child caregivers. So then, apart from attachment, there's also interpersonal conflict. That's been shown heavily to impact self-esteem. But it shows to actually impact adolescents and young adults more than older adults and such, and mid-age adults. So interpersonal conflicts can include all types of people. So include teachers, employers, friends, family, classmates, anyone really, any single person the person can interact with. But it seems like adolescents and young adults are affected more by more interpersonal conflicts. So research has shown that if a person has more interpersonal conflicts in their adolescent years and in their young adult years, they're more likely to have a lower self-esteem than others. Also, more people that have more interpersonal conflict shows a slower growth in their self-esteem across their lifespan. So in that trajectory that I'm showing, if a person, the average person is moving at whatever speed, a person that's had a lot of interpersonal conflict will maneuver through their self-esteem at a much slower pace. So they might not reach their peak for much longer, as fast, I guess, as other people as well. Also education. So research has shown that more education can impact and increase a person's self-esteem. However, there is, and as the second point says, that university degrees is associated with higher self-esteem, but specifically with like rapid, like how fast a person moves in self-esteem. So if we're saying like interpersonal conflict will slow down a person's ability to increase their self-esteem, university degrees seem to increase the person's self-esteem faster. However, the research has also shown that any kind of education, so it's the continual learning and continuing keeping your mind active is a huge thing in impacting your self-esteem. So it doesn't have to be formal education that impacts that, right? But I think in some way being stagnant and not moving forward and not learning any new thing in any stage of life can be really limiting to humans over time. And then that speaks also to then cognition. So cognition is, again, the way that we think or our thoughts or our mind has been correlated with self-esteem as well. And it's been shown that people that have high cognitive functioning and an in perceived sense of like internal control seem to have higher self-esteem. And so that can be attained by things like mentally stimulating activities. So people engaging, like I'm saying, in like things that they are learning things, or just things that, engage their mind. So things that can, and it can be learning activities such as that involve a person's working memory, such as like attention, their short-term memory and inhibition. And examples of this can be things like, I said learning and continuing to learn new things, grabbing new hobbies, doing riddles and puzzles. Sudoku is a very prevalent one, especially in old age. It's a very taxing kind of activity that works really well with the working memory and has been shown to correlate directly to increase higher cognition for older adults. So any kind of those things that you're just actively engaging your mind instead of just not doing the same thing, repetitive behaviors over and over again, that you're trying new things, you're learning new things, and that you're testing and like straining your mind in like decent amounts over the course of your life. Then we have like physical health, which I think this one seems like fair in that, if you have fewer health problems, you're more likely to have a higher sense of self-esteem. And that can be, that can be helped in the sense of like, focusing and paying attention to your physical health, making sure you're doing your checkups and you're keeping up with your doctor and your medications and working on your diet and exercise. All of those things can be helpful. And having less decline in your overall health. So most people, like I said, in the sense of that trajectory, our health does that same thing as self-esteem does. We increase to a certain point and then we start decreasing over time. And so if you're able to prevent that decrease or slow that decrease in time, that can be a really big impact on your self-esteem. Personality factors. So research has shown that having high levels of like personality factors such as extroversion, openness, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and emotional stability is all associated with high self-esteem. And specifically, openness is more correlated for higher self-esteem with men, and emotional stability is correlated with high self-esteem for women. And so, but all of those things do impact if a person is able to adapt and adopt some of those kind of personality factors. It can really help the way a person perceives themselves. And then on the opposite of that, lower neuroticism, in that if you're able to avoid and have less neuroticism, like you're able to maintain your self-esteem or even enhance it. Other random factors that has been shown in the research is that like even being a parent can be really high, can be really, or is correlated, can affect a person's high sense of self-esteem. And it's shown because possibly the validation and accomplishment that comes with being a parent and creating offspring and creating like generations for yourself and your family can be really impactful to a person's sense of self and their self-esteem in that way. And just an overall positive affect. So being overall like, positive, like having a positive sense of self, like looking, people that tend to look at the things from a glass half full perspective seem to have a higher sense of self-esteem as well. And all these correlates from the last slide in this are based on the research over the past 10 years. So still quite relevant about the things that are correlated and impact a person's self-esteem over the course of their life, especially in adulthood. So now I want to talk about what do we do to actually help yourselves, or things that you can do daily and over time to kind of help enhance your self-esteem, which I think is like the meat and potatoes of this talk. And hopefully you can gain something from this. I don't have everything listed and written out that I'm going to talk about. So I'd encourage, if you do want to write any of these things down, please do. You're welcome to grab a pen and paper at this time, just to grab some of these little tools and nudges that I'll give. But also in time, as we post this recording, I might add an additional resource slide or some kind of list of some of the resources I'll talk about in this section as well. But I'll give a few minutes in case anyone wants, or a minute in case anyone wants to grab a pen and paper. I'll assume anyone that wants to has grabbed something. And so I'll go through some of these step by step. They're bigger picture things, but within each point, I will add some little tidbits of things that I encourage other people to use, whether it's like in a professional sense, client-wise, or in a personal sense too. And I've found it helpful, and also have feedback that it has been helpful for a lot of people to go through some of these strategies. So the first one being, the first and I think the most important, is quality time with oneself. And that one I think is actually very useful, and almost everything else I'll talk about will fit right into that idea of quality time with oneself. However, I know that when I say that, some people think, oh, okay, yeah, she's probably going to say something like date yourself. And no, I'm not going to say that, because you don't have to date yourself. I think it can be really nerve-wracking to look at it in that way. But I do believe that quality time with ourselves is really important, because when we think about it, we only actually learn to love and accept and like our people in our lives by spending time with them. Even when you birth a child, only when you really get to know them and spend time with them that you learn to love them in a deeper sense. And so the same can be applied to ourselves. And I think a lot of people, a lot of us, I've been guilty of it too, miss spending time with ourselves just in general. And time with ourselves can look like so many different things, including some of the things I'll be talking about. But it can just be the basis of it. It can look like just dedicating time regularly, and regularly can look like whatever you want it to. It can look weekly, monthly, quarterly, twice a year, once a year, does not matter. But just some time to yourself where you've dedicated it as a time to turn towards you. And in that time, I would definitely encourage people, and like as a tool that sometimes I encourage people and clients to do, is doing a self-exploration. And the idea or the tool is called like an introduction to yourself. If you were able to spend that quality time with yourself and dedicate that quality time to yourself, whatever that looks like, again, it could look like different times and as regularly as you want, but it can also, within that time, it can also be like, it can be 15 minutes, it can be an hour, it can be a few hours, it can be a whole weekend, or like a few days, it can be a week, whatever you need or whatever you feel like is useful for you to turn to yourself, I think is always really useful. And so within that time, if you're able to find that time, whether soon after this talk or the next time you're able to find some quality time for yourself, I would say to do something called like an introduction to yourself. And whether you want to write this down, like write it down while you're there, or just reflect on it, I can be useful. And one of the things I think a lot of people don't think about often is who they are in this world, or who they are to people, or how they identify. And so in this introduction to yourself, I want you to imagine it like if you were maybe on a game show. I know game shows, they don't give a lot of time to be like, tell me about yourself. But if you were in a game show or something like that, and someone says like, so tell me about yourself, or maybe I guess even a first date, that could be something where it's like, someone's like, tell me about yourself. And you had to, for some reason, go really in depth how would you describe yourself? What would be the things that identify you? What are your roles? Are you going to define yourself like, they could be sorry, we can start with things like your demographic factors, your age, your sex, your gender, your hair color, your eye color, your height, all of these things. Then you can go into things like your roles. What do you do for a job, career? Talk about your education. What have you done and achieved so far in your life? Your role, like your position within your family and friends. Like, are you a sister, a brother, a mother, a father, a grandparent of some kind? A stepsister, like any role, a dog mom, like any role that you hold and hold true to yourself, what would be in there? And then also within that introduction, you can also talk about the things that like define you, also about like the things you like and hate. Like, do you hate blueberries? Do you love basketball? Like, what things that across your life do people should, if they want to know you more in depth, what would they have to know about your likes and your dislikes? Also, what about your joys? What things brings you inherent, like, and deep joy? What things do you hope for in life? What are your dreams? Any of those things that kind of set the stage to who you are. And if it's great when you write it down, actually, because you'll realize when you start writing, you'll have a lot to write. And as you continue to write, because there's so many facets and so many places you can go. What's your favorite movie? It can be favorites even. It can be food. It can be all these things that make up you. And so as you're writing, you'll find yourself most times writing a lot. And if you were able to read it back to yourself, you'll start to really reflect on, this is the person who I am. This is like who, and I'm paying attention to this person. And do I, maybe even at that point, thinking and evaluating, do I like that person? Do I need more from this person? What can I like? What don't I like? What can I remove? Those kind of things. So within quality time with yourself, that can be an activity to do, an introduction to yourself. Next, communication and assertiveness, I think is huge, especially because most times, most people are not self-reflective of their needs. And that can be really a big impact on a person's self-esteem as well. And so being able to understand that assertiveness and being like an assertive communicator too is really useful for being able to say, well, to acknowledge your needs and communicate them as well. Because the difference really, and why assertive communication is normally the healthiest, is because in the three types of communication there can be, where there's passive communication or aggressive communication, passive communication normally tells a person, your needs matter more than mine, which is not true or fair. Where aggressive communication tells a person, my needs matter more than yours, which again is not fair or right. But assertive communication, which is the right middle bit of this, tells people that my needs matter just as much as yours. And so I'm going to communicate them in a place that balances empathy, but directness. That that I hear you, I hear what you're saying, and I'm hearing and understanding your needs. And I'm also telling you that these are mine. And in that way, most people do not come off defensive or come off offended when a person communicates their needs in an assertive way. And I think just being able to do that and getting into practice of doing that, of being assertive and balancing that empathy and directness, can be really helpful for a sense of self and building that sense of self and their confidence. The next, boundary setting, which boundary setting is a huge one. And I think, we've all heard, and in different contexts, that people with low self-esteem struggle with their boundaries. And I do think that's true, and that sometimes people with low self-esteem do not believe they deserve like any kind of, that their needs or their boundaries be respected, or that they believe that, or they're too worried or too anxious to share them. And so I think, a good way of conceptualizing like boundary settings as a whole is to like, well, I'll speak on that in a second, but some things that like person can do to start to learn to set healthy boundaries is to first, again, and this could be again part of that quality time with oneself and introduction with yourself, is to reflect on your values. because your values is actually what's going to help you guide what your boundaries are. Because if you have a certain value, whatever it may be, like a value for like everyone having a voice, whatever that may be, then you can reflect on that piece being that I deserve a voice in whatever context, because I do believe that everyone deserves a voice. Or I value family. And so I know that like my boundary is that I will not let anyone talk or or cause harm to my family, like those kind of things. But it really is helpful to understand what your values are, whatever they are, in order to be able to start understanding where your boundaries and lines are. And then also your limits. You can also identify and define your limits. What are things that you absolutely cannot stand for or will not do? And that can be based on experiences you've had that you've known that has caused you grave harm or grave stress, or things that you would assume will cause you grave harm and stress. Those will be your limits. And so if you are able to define and understand those limits, you can work at setting boundaries in order to not get yourself to that point and to pass that limit. And also, like they said in this one, saying no to what does not serve you. I think sometimes people think that sometimes saying no is selfish or not kind, but saying no does not have to be selfish or unkind. And especially in the way that you say it, and that's where assertive communication comes, balancing that empathy and directness with there, that you would hear them and you understand it's a need, but you also have to reflect on, does it serve me as well? Because if you do things, and the idea of filling your cup so that you can pour from it, if you do things and like give of yourself to others, but you are not pouring into yourself, and it's not serving you, you're just depleting your cup. And so you're pouring from normally like a very empty cup that is not functional, and is normally done with a lot of like resentment and anger, or done with a lot of rush, whatever thing that someone has asked of you, or cause, it cause more negative, not negative consequences than we think, by then just saying no. Because saying no, depending on the circumstance, can actually help and cause a person to problem solve themselves, to look for other alternatives, and to find respect for you as well and your boundaries. So I do believe that in some way, always reflect on, does this serve me in this moment before even making a decision? And then that leads to my last bit on boundary setting, which is whole body decision making. And I think that is huge. One way to know what your boundaries and your limits, and let's just say even your values are, is to check in with yourself. And I know a lot of people do not love living in their bodies, and their bodies can be filled with a lot of, can be uncomfortable because of trauma and other bad experiences. But if you're able to, I would encourage everyone to be able to take a second, no matter what it is, within something that's being asked of you or something that's being required of you, well, to first like take a deep breath, which is really good to kind of settle yourself in. And then kind of you can do something like kind of like a body scan. Just take a second to just move through your body and imagine like a scanner going through from top to bottom, from the top of your head to your toes, and just check in with yourself. Do you notice any pain? Do you notice any tension? Do you notice any temperature? Do you notice any itch? Do you notice any, stress or like tension in any part of your body? And does that speak to what is being asked of you? Because if something that is being asked of you is causing something in your body not to sit right, that's more than likely something that is a limit, or something that you do not want to do and does not serve you. And so I would always encourage everyone to take a second and reflect and go kind of turn in, or take a second to body scan in order to check in and see and make that whole decision with your whole body. And if your body feels in some way opposite of that, if it feels light, if it feels excited, if it feels, in any way good, if you find your muscles in your face turning into a smile, then more than likely that thing that you're being asked of or requested of serves you. So you absolutely can make the decision to engage in that. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll always tell you something bad. Your body can tell you something good as well. So whole body decision-making can be a big part of boundary setting. Now, positive self-talk. And positive self-talk, I feel like sometimes can be a bit of a controversial thing, because, well, it's hard to believe if you just tell yourself positive things all the time. And personally, I find it hard to just say those things. And I think the biggest thing I can say with positive self-talk is that, and which can come into like affirmations, is that it doesn't have to be something that is unrealistic or grandiose. Positive self-talk can just look like things that are neutral or fair. So it's not saying, you know, before going into something big, like going into a presentation, for example, that I'm going to ace this presentation, I'm going to do so well, they're all going to love me, or whatever it may be. But it says, another way of saying that to yourself, or like reflecting in the positive self-talk way, is saying, I'm going to do my best. I am as prepared as I can be. I hope that people get something out of what I'm presenting. And yeah, like, I don't know, even just something like that can be just really useful. Or, you know, if you feel like you've said something, or in any moment has done something where a person is upset with you, let's just even say you're asserting your boundary, or asserting, you're sort of communicating, and a person gets upset, to recognize that, again, maybe saying my needs matter just as much as theirs. It's not a grandiose thing. It's a very fair and equal thing to say something like that. Or I'm just trying to think of some examples, but yeah, anything, it can be neutral or balanced. Neutral or balanced self-talk can be really useful and positive, more than you think. Saying, like, I know some people, and there are like self-help things and audio tapes that will tell you, I'm amazing, I'm the best I can be, I can achieve all I can achieve. And some of those things can be helpful for some people, but I also know that a lot of people are very cognitive in mind, and they have a hard time just hearing that thing and attributing it to themselves right away. But if they're hearing something more neutral and balanced and just fair, it's easier to swallow, I guess. And so that can be a really useful thing to practice in all moments, especially if you're feeling any kind of anxiety about something that's happened, or anything like that. Also, as a kind of a way of practicing positive self-talk as a daily activity, a way that I encourage people to do often is, like, for example, at the end of every day, doing a reflection piece of things that you're proud of today, things that you've accomplished today, anything that was positive about your day, like things such as those that can help kind of instinctually add to your positive affect, as we talked about how positive affect can increase your self-esteem, but just in general to get you in the practice of, yeah, I guess, like, turning towards yourself as well. So then the next thing that I have on here is like practicing gratitude and mindfulness. And that is basically, as it is, as it said, gratitude is a really helpful thing. And that can be something you can start your day with. And I think it's encouraged in a lot of places and a lot of self-help things, is practicing gratitude. It definitely helps also shift some of the negative things that happen in our lives. And then mindfulness, just focusing on being present. I think a lot of people, whether it's anxiety, depression, trauma, stress, are not really mindful in their day-to-day activities and their day-to-day interactions. And so mindfulness can come from, you know, direct activities and tools you can do. There is things like right now, I always forget the name of this. There's a Netflix Headspace, yes, Netflix series going on, a Headspace for anxiety and Headspace for sleep, that can be really helpful. But Headspace, the app as well, and like you can get it even on an Apple Watch or smartwatch, can be a really helpful way to start practicing mindfulness. And then some people can go into the idea of mindful meditations. You can pay for mindful meditations and audiobooks to start practicing daily. And I think that sense of the great thing about mindfulness meditation and practices is that it helps ground you. And as a grounded person, you're always going to feel more confident and more affirmed in yourself. And so mindfulness is a really great tool, and for all types of actually mental health issues, but especially self-esteem as well. Then the last little bit here, self-compassion, which is a huge one. I think it's actually, I would think in this section, probably the biggest thing is self-compassion when it comes to self-esteem. And self-compassion can have so many different facets that go into it. Two of the biggest ones for me that I notice shows up in a lot of people is, for example, a distorted sense of guilt and holding a lot of shame. And those things are really big things sometimes for people to acknowledge or remember, and like trying and working at accepting an appropriate sense of responsibility so they can let go of distorted sense of guilt and moving away from shame by practicing self-compassion and like understanding and connecting with others even can be really useful in rectifying and increasing your self-esteem. And a great resource for self-compassion is the Dr. Kristen Neff, who does a lot of her research and practice in self-compassion. And she has a website called self-compassion, self-compassion.org, that has a lot of self-compassion resources, including mindful meditations on compassion and a lot of self-compassion breaks that you can engage in daily. So Dr. Kristen Neff, selfcompassion.org can be a really useful thing to start getting into the mind of self-compassion. Then attachment. So like I said, attachment was one of the things I find as the most important determinants of self-esteem. And so I think self-exploration and a journey into understanding attachment and your attachment style and how it impacts you and your day-to-day behaviors and interactions is really useful. And so you can work on your attachment or learn more about your attachment through some things like therapy, but also if you're interested in ever reading, a good book is Attached. The book is actually called Attached, and the image in the front is of two magnets in the shape of a heart, and it's by the authors Amir Levine and Rachel Heller. And it's a really popular New York best-selling book in the past few years that I think is a great resource because it starts out by giving you an assessment quiz, an attachment quiz to kind of assess what your attachment style is. And then it goes into talking about how your attachment style develops and how it can impact your relationships, and also a little bit of what kind of attachment styles you're compatible with in time over the course of your life too. So Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller would be a good book to start with. Self-care again. So self-care again relates right to what I said in the beginning about quality time with yourself, but it can also look very different because the difference with quality time with oneself can mean doing nothing, just reflecting and just being. But self-care means active things that you're doing daily or like daily. And this one, and even I said quality time with yourself, you can pick regularly do it, you know, in your own time. It can be, you can define what that is, but self-care I think should be actually more regular and if not daily. And there's different types of self-care. It can be physical self-care, intellectual self-care, spiritual, psychological, emotional. And there's so many different things you can do within each of those to help increase your sense of self and self-esteem. And again, I know people like to say that self-care is selfish too, but it comes back to the same idea, is that you're building your capacity in order to give to others as well. So it's actually more selfless than it is selfish. So because you're pouring into yourself, you can pour into others. So yeah, exactly as it's listed, like physical, like exercise, diet, sleep, all of those things, intellectual, learning new things, being intrigued, what's called, yeah, like learning new hobbies, trying new things, new foods, whatever, spiritual, reflecting on your values, connecting to things that you feel good, connecting to the universe, the earth, all these kind of things can be great for people. And psychological and emotional can look like a lot like boundary setting, taking time, naming your emotions often, those kind of things can all be a part of self-care. And you can also do self-care, and part of that, a good activity in that is journaling too, to reflect on some of these things for yourself in a moment of self-care. Then there's connection. So like pursuing and nurturing healthy relationship, that's just exactly what that is. So, we talk about how, whether it's Maslow's hierarchy or what we're talking about when it comes to research on relationships, healthy relationships is actually the biggest determinant of self-esteem, because, and even attachment speaks to this, that we're able to find acceptance, love, good feelings, all of the things that define self-esteem by connecting with other people that validate that for us as well. And so I think always finding connection in any moment, and it could be trivial, but it could just like you're just talking to someone about something you saw on social media, but by having that connection piece with someone that does not drain you, someone that you actually find joy or entertainment by spending time with, can be really useful for the self understanding. And then pouring into others, which I say like, women kind of repeating, but the same idea is like showing respect and unconditional love to you and your loved ones. And this is a big piece for especially kids and young ones. Like sometimes we think that, yeah, we do know best for them, and there's different scenarios where we can't give them everything they need. But at a basis, we should always be showing respect and unconditional love to others, and especially young people. And if we're able to show, and this kind of positive regard to especially young ones, that we believe in them and that we believe and think that they're valuable and worthy in this world, they will start to believe it for themselves as well. And so showing that for young ones, but also all people, you know, acknowledging people's accomplishments, thanking them for their help or things that they've done, telling them how you feel about them. All of those things can help a person in the sense of their self-esteem. So I encourage you to do that for your loved ones often. And then as a last bit is just processing trauma, because I think trauma is the biggest basis, if not attachment trauma, other hits to our self-esteem over the course of our life can really impact the way our self-esteem is. And so processing that trauma in a safe space can be really useful. And so you can do that through things like therapy, support groups, or just any place that you feel safe, you can process that trauma. And also just even being in healthy relationships can be really healing for traumatic events that impacted our self-esteem as well. So yes, those are some of the tools and things I wanted to share with you for how you can enhance your self-esteem. So that is all that I have. And I wanted to just end on another quote. Like I said, I like quotes. And I think this is one of my favorite quotes, and it's been for many years. And I think it speaks nicely to the idea that sometimes we miss that there is more to us than we think. And again, it's by Nelson Mandela, and most people have heard it, but it says, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light and not our darkness that most frightens us. And so I encourage you guys to reflect on that piece. I think it's a useful one. And yeah, thank you all for being here and for listening. And I hope there's something you can take from this. So
Thank
yeah,
you, Sheila.
you're
Thanks.
welcome.
That was wonderful. If you want to stop screen sharing, and I'll just say goodbye to anybody who can't join us for a couple of minutes for questions. And just thank you very much for joining us this evening. And you are always welcome to join us for these talks. We have a couple, maybe 3 or so more actually coming up still yet before the holidays. And so hopefully we'll get a chance to see you again soon. Thanks for coming.